My name is Elena, and for nearly 2 years, I lived a nightmare that most people couldn't even imagine. My own parents, the people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters, told every single business owner in this city that I was a thief. Because of their lies, I was blacklisted from every professional firm within a 50-mile radius. It didn't matter that I had graduated with a 3.8 GPA in finance or that my professors had written me glowing recommendation letters. In a small city where reputation is everything, my father's word was law, and he had decided that I was a criminal. He thought he had finally broken me. He actually enjoyed watching me struggle. For 18 months, he would drive his expensive car past the local resort, where I was forced to scrub toilets just to afford bread, and he would laugh. He thought those 2 years of rejection and humiliation would bring me crawling back to him, begging for his forgiveness and his control. What he didn't know was that my grandmother, Rosemary, had seen this coming nearly 2 decades ago. He didn't know about the sealed wax envelope she had left for me, or why the CEO of the most powerful investment firm in the country was quietly waiting for my arrival. Before I continue and reveal the incredible secret my grandmother hid from my father, if you find this story worth hearing, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I am sharing. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Also, let me know if you have ever felt like someone was trying to control your future against your will. I would love to hear your thoughts and engage with your stories. Now, let me take you back to the day I discovered the depth of my family's betrayal. The Sterling family looked like the definition of success from the outside. My father, Arthur Sterling, owned the most prominent real estate development company in the county. Our home was a sprawling estate with a 4-car garage that housed his silver Mercedes, my mother's luxury SUV, and my brother Julian's brand new sports car, which was a graduation gift for simply finishing business school. My mother, Eleanor, played her role perfectly. She hosted charity luncheons on fine china and always had fresh lilies delivered to the foyer. But behind those closed doors, the atmosphere was cold and calculated. Julian was 4 years older than me, and he was the golden child, the undisputed heir to the Sterling Empire. From the moment he could walk, he was groomed to take over the family business. Everything he wanted, he received. When he wanted to spend a summer in Paris, my father signed the check, without a second thought. But when I asked for the same opportunity 2 years later, my father didn't even look up from his newspaper. He just laughed and said, "What for? You will just get married eventually, and someone else will take care of you. Save me the money." I ended up going to a local university and commuting from home while Julian lived in a high-rise apartment paid for by the company. At family dinners, the conversation was always a monologue about Julian's projects, Julian's promotions, and Julian's bright future. I was the one passing the salt and clearing the plates, a ghost at the end of the table. I remember being 16 and overhearing my father in the kitchen. He told my mother that daughters do not need to achieve. They need to learn how to keep a home. He said I would marry well, and that was my only job. That was the day I realized that to my father, I wasn't a daughter with dreams. I was just another asset to be managed. The real trouble started right before I headed off to my accounting program. My parents gave me a credit card for school necessities. My mother slid it across the table and told me it was for books and supplies. My father nodded and told me not to go crazy, but that I was covered. I was 18, and I wanted to prove I was responsible. I used that card exactly as they instructed. I bought my expensive accounting textbooks, a secondhand laptop from a campus sale, and basic supplies like calculators and notebooks. I didn't buy a single designer bag or a pair of shoes. Over 3 months, the total came to exactly $1,500. When the bill arrived, Arthur Sterling exploded. I remember the way the dining room seemed to shake when he slammed that statement onto the table. He stood up, the veins in his neck bulging, and screamed at me about who gave me permission to spend that much. I was terrified. I told him he had said it was for school. He looked at me with eyes as cold as ice and called me a thief. He claimed one $1,500 was a shopping spree, not necessities. My mother just sat there, her face pale, refusing to look at me. My father told me I would pay back every single cent or I could find somewhere else to live. I didn't argue. I took 2 part-time jobs, working at the campus library and taking graveyard shifts at a 24-hour diner. It took me 8 months of exhausting labor, but I paid back every dollar. I kept every single receipt. I documented every payment. But the debt wasn't the only cost. Working 30 hours a week meant I couldn't take a full course load. It took me 6 years to finish a 4-year degree. My father refused to help with the extra tuition, calling me a burden every time I walked through the door. I thought once the money was paid, the incident would be forgotten. I was wrong. My father has a long memory, and he had decided that this $1,500 would be the weapon he used to keep me under his thumb forever. The only person who truly saw me was my grandmother, Rosemary. She wasn't like my mother. Rosemary had built a successful chain of retail stores from the ground up in the 70s and retired as a self-made millionaire. She was sharp, and she saw exactly what Arthur was doing to me. She used to sit with me on her porch and teach me how to read complex financial statements when I was only 12. She always told me that knowledge is freedom and that no one can take what is inside your mind. I remember one afternoon, shortly before she passed away, she took my hand and looked at me with an intensity I had never seen. She told me she had already prepared for my future. She said that my father couldn't control everything, and that a day would come when I would need help that they would refuse to give. She told me that when that day came, I would be ready. I didn't understand her then. I was young, and I thought she was just being dramatic. Rosemary passed away 3 years ago, and my father told us all that she had left her entire estate to various charities, leaving only small, insignificant tokens for her grandchildren. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I was too busy celebrating my graduation. I had finally finished. I was at the top of my class, a 3.8 GPA, and I had a recommendation from a partner at a top-tier accounting firm. I thought my life was finally beginning. After the ceremony, my father approached me with a smirk. He offered me an unpaid internship at his company, telling me I could live at home and help Julian with the books. He called it an apprenticeship. I thanked him, but told him I wanted to find my own way and get outside experience. His face didn't change, but his eyes went dark. He simply said, "Fine, try it your way." He turned his back on me and walked away. I had no idea that his silence was actually a declaration of war. The rejection started almost immediately. I applied to every firm in town. I would have amazing interviews where the managers would shake my hand and tell me they were impressed. Then, 48 hours later, I would receive a cold, automated email saying they had moved on to another candidate. This happened 15 times in a row. I started to spiral into self-doubt. I revised my resume 100 times. I practiced my interview answers in the mirror until my voice was hoarse. Nothing worked. Finally, at my 20th interview with a firm called Evergreen Financial, the HR manager pulled me aside. She looked at me with genuine pity and told me that I should talk to my father. When I asked her why, she wouldn't say another word, but the implication was clear. I drove home with my hands shaking so hard I could barely steer. I walked into my father's study and found him sitting there with a glass of expensive scotch. I asked him why I couldn't get a job. He didn't even look up. He just smiled and said he had told those employers the truth. He told them I was a thief. He told them I had stolen $1,500 from my own family and that I couldn't be trusted with money. I screamed at him that I had paid it back, but he just shrugged. He said potential employers deserved to know what kind of person they were hiring. My mother stood in the doorway, watching me crumble, and she said nothing. My father told me that if I wanted a job, I could come work for him for free. Otherwise, I could stay unemployed. That was the moment I realized my family was gone. I wasn't their daughter. I was their prisoner. But they had forgotten about Rosemary, and they had no idea that the game was only just beginning. That night in my father's study, the air felt thick with the smell of expensive scotch and the suffocating weight of his control. I looked at Arthur Sterling and finally saw him for what he was. Not a protector, but a jailer. He had systematically dismantled my future before it even began, whispering poison into the ears of every professional contact in the city. In a town where sterling real estate had built half the skyline, his version of the truth was the only one that mattered. Within weeks, the shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. Neighbors who had known me since I was a child suddenly found the sidewalk very interesting when I walked by. The lady at the local bakery, who used to congratulate me on my grades, now treated me like a stranger. The whispers were everywhere. People said it was such a shame about Arthur's daughter, that the family was devastated by her theft, and that I simply wouldn't listen to reason. My father hadn't just called employers. He had seeded this narrative at golf clubs, charity dinners, and board meetings. He made sure that to the world, I wasn't a summa cum laude graduate. I was a liability. I stood alone in the hallway of our mansion, listening to the silence of a house that no longer felt like home. My father thought that by stripping away my options, I would have no choice but to crawl back to him and accept the unpaid internship he offered, effectively becoming his servant for life. He wanted me to understand that without him, I was nothing. But as I looked at the reflection of my pale, determined face in the foyer mirror, I knew I would rather sleep on the street than give him the satisfaction of breaking me. Before I tell you how I survived the next 18 months and the shocking way my family tried to humiliate me in public, I want to pause. If this story is hitting close to home for you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring these stories of resilience to light. I'd love for you to drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to start from zero because someone you trusted tried to hold you back? How did you find the strength to keep going? I'm reading all your comments, and I can't wait to hear your experiences. Now, let's get back to the hardest 2 years of my life. With only $3,000 in my savings account and a rent check due for my tiny studio apartment, I was on a ticking clock. I had maybe 2 months before I would be completely broke. I spent every waking hour applying for jobs far outside the finance sector, places where the sterling name didn't carry enough weight to ruin me. That was how I found myself standing in the employee break room of the Blue Harbor Resort on the outskirts of town. It was a modest place, catering to traveling salesmen and families on a budget. The job posting was simple: housekeeping staff needed, no experience necessary, no references required. The manager, Linda Crawford, was a woman who looked like she had seen every version of a hard luck story. She looked at my application, then at my face, and then back at the paper. "You have a 3.8 GPA in finance," she said flatly. "Why do you want to scrub toilets?" I could have made up a story, but I was too exhausted for more lies. I told her the truth, because no one else will hire me and I need to eat. Linda studied me for a long moment, perhaps waiting for me to flinch. When I didn't, she slid a pale blue polyester uniform across the desk. "I don't care what the gossips say," she told me. "I care if you show up at 6 a.m. and do the work. Don't be late." For the next year and a half, my life was a blur of industrial cleaner, stained sheets, and backbreaking labor. I traded my textbooks for scrub brushes and my dreams of corporate strategy for the reality of emptying trash cans. I worked the graveyard shifts and the double shifts, saving every penny while my father continued to tell the town that I was a lost cause. I stayed invisible, or so I thought. Arthur couldn't touch my job at the resort, but he certainly knew where I was. The breaking point came 6 months into my time at Blue Harbor. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. I believe in calculated cruelty. It was a Friday evening, and the resort restaurant was packed. I was pushing my heavy supply cart down the service corridor, my hands tucked into yellow rubber gloves, when I heard a laugh that made my blood run cold. It was my father's booming, self-satisfied bark. I froze, pressing myself against the wall, but it was too late. The hostess was leading my family to a prime window table directly in my line of sight. There they were: Arthur in a charcoal suit that cost more than I made in a year, Eleanor draped in pearls, and Julian checking his Rolex, looking bored. They looked like a portrait of old money elegance, a stark contrast to the wrinkled polyester uniform I was wearing. I tried to pull my cart away, but my father's eyes locked onto mine. A wide, mocking grin split his face. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Eleanor, look! Our daughter has finally found her true calling." Julian let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "Hey, Elena," he called out across the dining room. "Missed a spot in room 305. Make sure you get the corners this time." Several guests turned to stare. I saw the recognition in their eyes, then the pity, and then the whispers. I stood there, clutching a toilet brush in one hand and a bottle of bleach in the other, while my family toasted to their success with crystal water glasses. My father raised his wine glass toward me in a mock salute. "Maybe now," he said with cold satisfaction, "you'll finally learn to respect the hand that feeds you." I didn't cry. I didn't run. I simply turned my cart and pushed it back into the shadows of the corridor. But that night, something changed inside me. The shame that had been weighing me down for months didn't disappear. It transformed. It became a hard, cold iron at the center of my being. I remembered what my grandmother Rosemary had whispered to me. "Knowledge is freedom, Elena. No one can take what is in here." I went home that night to my freezing apartment and realized I had forgotten one thing. In the back of my closet was a box of old electronics I had intended to sell for grocery money. Inside was my old phone, the one with the cracked screen that I hadn't turned on since the day after Grandma Rosemary's funeral. I plugged it in, and as the screen flickered to life, a flood of missed notifications appeared. Among the spam and the old texts was a single voicemail from a law firm I didn't recognize, dated 2 years ago. The voice on the recording was professional and measured, asking me to contact the office regarding the estate of Margaret Hayes. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized my father had told me there was nothing left for me, that everything had gone to charity. He had intercepted the mail, but he couldn't intercept this digital ghost. Grandma had left me a door, and for 2 years I had been too broken to see it. Little did I know, the CEO of the city's largest investment firm was already holding the key. As I sat on the floor of that cramped supply closet at the resort, the realization of my father's plan hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just trying to control my career. He was planning to trade my future for a business merger. But that old, cracked phone in my hand was flickering with a different kind of hope. The voicemail from the law firm of Henderson and Associates was 2 years old, a ghost of a message that my father had tried to bury. He had told the lawyers I wasn't interested, acting as my representative while I was drowning in grief after my grandmother Rosemary's funeral. He had intercepted the mail and silenced the calls, but he couldn't delete the digital footprint. I realized then that my grandmother hadn't just left me sentimental tokens. She had left me a door, and Arthur Sterling had spent 2 years trying to nail it shut. The next morning, I didn't go to work at the resort. I took the last of my savings and bought a bus ticket to the city. I wore my only decent outfit, a navy suit I had found at a thrift store for $12, and I carried a folder containing my 3.8 GPA transcript. My destination was the towering glass skyscraper of Vance Global. I had no appointment, no recommendation, and according to the industry gossip, no reputation left. But I had Rosemary's voice in my head, telling me that knowledge was freedom. Before I reveal the incredible contents of the wax-sealed envelope that changed my life forever, I want to ask you a favor. If you have ever had someone try to write your story for you, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. It helps us continue to share these stories of standing up against those who try to keep us small. I would also love to read your comments. Tell me, have you ever discovered a secret that completely changed how you saw your family? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one of them. Now, let's get back to the moment I stepped into the CEO's office. The lobby of Vance Global was a cathedral of modern finance. Polished marble floors, high-tech security gates, and people in suits that cost more than my entire apartment building. I felt invisible in my scuffed heels, but when I gave my name at the front desk, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The receptionist didn't look at my resume. She looked at a notification on her screen that had been waiting there for 18 years. Within minutes, I was being ushered into a private elevator and taken to the top floor. Oliver Vance, the CEO whose face graced every major business magazine, was standing by a floor-to-ceiling window. When he turned to look at me, he didn't see a girl who had spent the last year scrubbing floors. He looked at me with a profound sense of relief, as if a long-awaited debt was finally being settled. He told me that nearly 20 years ago, when he was just a kid, With an ambitious business plan and zero capital, every bank in the city had laughed him out of the room. Every bank, except for one person. My grandmother Rosemary had met him at a charity event and seen the spark that others had missed. She didn't just give him advice. She wrote him a check for $250,000. It was a massive gamble at the time, but she had one non-negotiable condition. She told him that she wasn't investing for herself. She was investing for her granddaughter, Lena. She made him promise that when the time came and I showed up at his door looking for a way out, he would be ready. Oliver walked over to a high-security safe and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. The wax seal was amber with age, embossed with my grandmother's initials. He placed it in my trembling hands and told me that for 18 years, my name and social security number had been flagged in their system. The moment I had submitted my application online a few nights prior, an alert had gone straight to his private terminal. Inside that envelope was a legal document that turned my world upside down. It was a certificate of ownership for a founding stake in Vance Global. My grandmother hadn't just invested money, she had structured the deal so that 10% of the company's original shares were held in an irrevocable trust for me. Because she knew my father's nature, she had designed the trust to remain silent until I either reached the age of 30 or sought employment at Vance Global on my own merits. She wanted to ensure that no one, especially not Arthur Sterling, could ever touch it or even know it existed. Along with the shares, there was a small, hand-bound leather journal. As I flipped through the pages, I felt tears blurring my vision. It wasn't just a diary. It was a record of every time my father had diminished me. She had documented the day he refused to pay for my advanced math tutors because he said girls didn't need to be smart. She had recorded the night he told my mother that I would be the perfect bargaining chip for a future partnership. She had seen the trap he was building for me from the moment I was born, and she had spent decades quietly constructing an escape route. Oliver told me that based on the company's current valuation, those shares were worth approximately $3.4 million. But more than the money, it was the validation. For 2 years, I had been told I was a thief and a failure. I had been made to feel like I was worth less than the dirt I was cleaning. But Rosemary had seen me. She had known I would have the strength to survive my father's sabotage and find my way to that office. Oliver then sat me down and told me that my father had actually called him that very morning. Arthur had somehow tracked my movements and tried to poison Oliver's mind, repeating the same lies about me being a thief and a disgrace. He told Oliver that I was unqualified and unstable. Oliver had listened to every word, nodding along, all while knowing that the woman Arthur was slandering was technically one of the most significant shareholders of his firm. We sat in that office for 2 hours, going over the legalities and the history of the investment. Oliver offered me a position as a senior financial analyst, a role that my 3.8 GPA and my struggle had more than prepared me for. But he also had another idea. He knew about the upcoming charity gala where my father was planning to announce the merger and my arranged marriage to the son of a plumbing magnate. Oliver looked at me with a sharp, knowing smile. He said that Arthur Sterling had spent years controlling the narrative in the dark. It was time, he suggested, for the truth to step into the light. He invited me to attend the gala not as Arthur's daughter, but as a founding partner of Vance Global. As I held my grandmother's letter to my chest, I realized the war wasn't over, but the tides had finally turned. My father thought he was about to sell his greatest asset, but he had no idea he was about to meet the woman he had tried so hard to destroy. After leaving the towering glass headquarters of Vance Global, the world should have felt brighter. I had a certificate in my bag that proved I was a multimillionaire and a letter from my grandmother Rosemary that felt like a warm embrace from the afterlife. But as I rode the bus back to the outskirts of town, the reality of my situation pulled me back down. I was still Lena Sterling, the girl who was blacklisted, the girl wearing a $12 thrift store suit, and the girl who still had to finish her shift at the Blue Harbor Resort. I couldn't just vanish. If I disappeared now, Arthur would know something was wrong. I needed to play the part of the broken daughter for just a little while longer until the trap was set. The resort was quiet that evening. the kind of heavy silence that precedes a storm. I changed back into my pale blue polyester uniform, the fabric itching against my skin, and grabbed my cleaning cart. My mind was spinning with numbers: $3.1 million, 10% shares, 18 years of waiting. I felt like a spy in my own life, scrubbing the floors of a world that no longer owned me. But even in my wildest dreams, I couldn't have imagined that the worst betrayal was yet to come. I thought my father calling me a thief was the peak of his cruelty. I was wrong. He wasn't just trying to destroy my past, he was currently negotiating away my entire future. Before I reveal the chilling conversation I overheard through the vents of the resort restaurant, I have a small request for all of you watching. If you believe that no one should ever be treated like a piece of property, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to tell these stories of strength and survival. Also, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever felt like your family saw you as a tool for their own success rather than a human being with your own dreams? What did you do to reclaim your life? I read every single story you share. Now, let us get back to that dark night at the resort. It was around 10 p.m., and I was restocking the supply closet on the second floor, directly above the private dining alcoves of the resort restaurant. The building was old, and the ventilation ducts were a design flaw I had long ago learned to exploit to hear the gossip of the wealthy guests. But that night, a familiar voice drifted up through the metal grate, a voice that made my heart stop. It was Arthur. He was jovial, his tone booming with that false confidence he used when he was about to close a deal. I crept closer to the vent, pressing my ear against the cold metal, my breath hitching in my throat. I heard the clink of ice in a glass, and then another voice, older and gruff. I recognized it as Richard Palmer, the owner of Palmer Construction and my father's biggest rival. "I tell you, Richard, it is perfect timing," my father said, followed by a low chuckle. "Your son is looking to settle down and expand the family legacy. My daughter, Lena, she needs stability. She has been a bit rebellious lately, but 18 months of reality has finally brought her to her senses. We merged the families, we merged the businesses. Sterling Real Estate and Palmer Construction. Together, we will dominate the entire county." There was a pause, and I could almost hear Richard leaning forward. "I heard she has been causing some trouble," he said, his voice skeptical. "That theft thing you mentioned at the club? People are talking, Arthur. Is she really the right fit for my son?" Arthur's voice didn't waver. "That is all handled, Richard. It was a calculated move. She needed to understand the value of a dollar and the weight of my authority. I have kept her on a very short leash. After a few more months of scrubbing floors, she will agree to anything, including meeting your boy. She is a smart girl. She just needed to be broken. Once the marriage is finalized, we can announce the merger. It is a strategic alliance that will make us both untouchable." Richard let out a dark laugh. "You are a piece of work, Arthur, using your own daughter as the glue for a business deal. Well, my son needs a wife who knows her place and has a good head for figures. If she can handle the books and keep her mouth shut, we have a deal. Let us talk about the stock options and the land rights." I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor of the supply closet, surrounded by industrial-sized rolls of toilet paper and bottles of bleach. My blood had turned to ice. My own father was planning to sell me. He wasn't just sabotaging my career, he was treating me like a commodity, a bargaining chip to be traded for land rights and market dominance. To him, I wasn't his daughter. I was a $1,200 thief when it suited his narrative, and a multi-million-dollar asset when he needed to seal a merger. The irony was suffocating. Downstairs, they were discussing me as if I were a piece of livestock, unaware that at that very moment, I was technically more powerful than both of them combined. Thanks to Grandma Rosemary, I owned a founding stake in the firm they were both desperate to impress. They were talking about dominating the county while I held the keys to the kingdom. I stayed in that closet for a long time, listening to them discuss the numbers of my life. They talked about the wedding date, the merger timeline, and the way they would announce it at the upcoming charity gala. They never once mentioned my happiness, my consent, or my dreams. It was a cold, calculated transaction between two men who saw the women in their lives as nothing more than accessories to their power. I thought about my mother, Eleanor. Had she been sold too? Was her Chanel wardrobe and her perfect smile just the price Arthur paid for her silence and her family's connections? I felt a wave of pity for her, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce, burning resolve. I would not be another Eleanor. I would not let my life be a footnote in my father's ledgers. I stood up and wiped the dust from my uniform. The fear that had paralyzed me for 2 years was gone, replaced by a clarity that felt like a superpower. Arthur wanted a strategic alliance? He wanted a grand announcement at the gala? Fine. I would give him exactly what he wanted, but not in the way he expected. I walked out of the supply closet and back to my cleaning cart. As I pushed it down the hallway, the wheels squeaking against the linoleum, I realized that the Blue Harbor Resort was no longer my prison. It was my training ground. Every floor I had scrubbed and every insult I had endured had prepared me for this moment. My father thought he was the one holding the leash, but he didn't realize that the dog had already found the key to the gate. I had 1 week until the gala. 1 week to prepare my final performance as the obedient, broken daughter. I would let him believe his plan was working. I would let him think I was ready to surrender. Because when I finally stood on that stage at the Grand Meridian Hotel, I wasn't just going to break the news of my new job. I was going to dismantle my father's empire, piece by piece, in front of everyone he was trying to impress. Grandma Rosemary had told me to live free. And I realized then that freedom isn't something you are given. It is something you take. The trap was set, the invitation was accepted, and for the first time in my life, I was the one in control of the narrative. Arthur Sterling was about to learn that you should never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose and $3 million to gain. The morning of my interview at Vance Global felt like the walk of a soldier toward a battlefield she knew she might not survive. I was standing on the sidewalk just 50 feet away from the most imposing glass and steel skyscraper in the city when my phone buzzed in my pocket. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the caller ID, Arthur. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. For a second, I wanted to let it go to voicemail, but I knew my father. If I didn't answer, he would only get louder. "I hear you have an interview today." His voice came through, flat and chillingly calm. My stomach dropped. How did he know? Then I remembered my brother Julian's smug face. He had been tracking my social media, cross-referencing my location at the bus station with every major job posting in the city. Arthur didn't wait for me to speak. I know everyone in this industry, Lena. It only takes one phone call to end this little fantasy of yours. Come home now, or I will make sure this door slams in your face so hard you will never stand up again. I stood there, looking up at the 40 floors of reflecting glass, feeling like a tiny speck in my $12 Goodwill suit, while my father tried to set my future on fire from 300 miles away. Before I tell you what happened when I finally stepped through those revolving doors, if you believe that no one has the right to steal your dreams, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep sharing these stories of resilience. Also, leave a comment below with the word brave if you have ever stood your ground when someone tried to intimidate you. I love reading how you all find your strength. Now let's get back to the moment everything changed. I silenced my phone, straightened my scuffed heels, and walked into the lobby of Vance Global. The atmosphere inside was everything my life currently wasn't. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, a 3-story atrium with modern art, and executives in silk and wool crossing the floor with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I approached the reception desk, acutely aware of the wrinkles in my secondhand blazer. "Elena Sterling, I have an interview," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The receptionist, a woman in a perfectly tailored blouse, typed something into her computer and then looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Yes, Miss Sterling. Mr. Vance will see you personally on the 40th floor." My head spun. CEOs didn't conduct entry-level interviews. I was certain my father's call had already worked, and this was just a formal way to show me the exit. The elevator rose silently. When the doors opened, I was led down a hallway, lined with the history of the company, until we reached a heavy oak door. The assistant whispered. "Go right in. He has been expecting you for a long time." I pushed the door open to find Oliver Vance standing by a window that overlooked the entire city. He was a man with silver at his temples, and the kind of presence that usually only exists on the covers of financial magazines. He didn't look at me like a desperate job seeker. He looked at me like I was a guest of honor he had been waiting 18 years to greet. "Please, sit down, Lena," he said, his voice warm and steady. "Before we talk about your resume, I need to give you this." He walked to a vintage brass safe in the wall, entered a code, and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. It was sealed with wax that had turned to amber. On the front, in my grandmother Rosemary's elegant flowing script, were the words, "Only to be opened when Alina Sterling comes for an interview at Vance Global." My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I held it. Oliver explained that nearly 20 years ago, when he was just a kid with a business plan that every bank had rejected, Rosemary had written him a check for $250,000. She had one condition. She wouldn't take the investment in her own name. She put the shares into an irrevocable trust for her then 6-year-old granddaughter. She set up a flag in the company's HR system so that the moment I ever applied for a job, Oliver would be notified. Inside the envelope were 3 items that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. First, a letter from Grandma, apologizing for not being there to hand me this herself. She wrote that she had seen the signs of Arthur's cruelty from the very beginning, how he diminished everyone around him to feel powerful. She knew he would try to trap me, and she wanted me to have a door he could never lock. The second item was a notarized certificate of ownership. I wasn't just there to apply for a job. I was looking at a document that proved I owned 10% of Vance Global as a founding stakeholder. "At current market valuations," Oliver whispered, "those shares are worth approximately $3.1 million. I couldn't breathe. While I had been scrubbing toilets and counting pennies for bread, I had been a millionaire on paper. The third item was a small leather journal. As I flipped through the pages, my heart broke. Grandma had been documenting years of Arthur's behavior. October 1998, Arthur screamed at Eleanor about household spending. June 2008, Arthur forbade Elena from applying to out-of-state colleges, saying women don't need fancy degrees. She had recorded every instance of control and manipulation, preparing a legal and emotional defense for me before I was even old enough to understand I was a victim. Oliver leaned back and told me that my father had indeed called him that morning. Arthur had been smug and confident, telling Oliver that I was a thief who couldn't be trusted. Oliver looked at me and smiled a sharp, cold smile. "Your father just tried to slander a founding shareholder of this company. He thinks he's sabotaging a failure, but he has no idea he's actually attacking one of my bosses." Oliver then made a proposal that made my blood hum with a new kind of energy. He didn't just want to hire me as a senior financial analyst. He wanted me to stand in the light. He told me about a major charity gala happening the following week, an event Arthur had been desperately trying to network his way into. Oliver wanted to introduce me there, not as the runaway daughter, but as the woman who held the future of Arthur's construction contracts in her hands. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't the one being hunted. I was the one holding the map. Arthur Sterling thought he had sold my future for a business merger, but he was about to find out that Rosemary had already paid for my freedom in full 18 years ago. The Grand Meridian Hotel looked like a scene from a high-budget movie, a world of crystal chandeliers dripping from 30-foot ceilings and a live jazz quartet playing softly in the corner. Waiters in white gloves circulated through the crowd with trays of vintage champagne and delicate canapes. The guest list was a who is who of regional power players, from politicians to old-money philanthropists. I stood in a private room upstairs, watching the scene below through a glass partition, feeling the cool silk of my navy sheath dress against my skin. Only 3 days ago, I had been wearing a wrinkled polyester uniform and scrubbing toilets at a roadside resort. Now, thanks to the PR team at Vance Global, I looked every bit the professional senior analyst I was becoming. My hair was swept into a sleek chignon, and the pearl earrings I wore were a silent tribute to Grandma Rosemary. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like a founding partner. Through the window, I spotted my family entering the ballroom. Arthur walked in first, his chest puffed out as he surveyed the room like he already owned it in his charcoal Armani suit. Eleanor trailed behind him in a classic Chanel outfit, wearing her perfect practice smile. Julian followed them, looking bored as he checked his Rolex. They had no idea that their presence here was only possible because they had spent months desperately trying to network their way into a contract with Vance Global. They thought they were finally moving into the inner circle, but they were actually walking into a trap that had been set 18 years ago. Before I continue and describe the moment my father's carefully constructed world came crashing down in front of 200 people, I have a small request. If you believe that truth always finds a way to the light, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything as we share these stories of standing up for yourself. I would also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where you finally stood in your truth after being silenced for a long time? Tell me your story below. I read every single one of them. Now let us get back to the gala. From my vantage point, I watched Arthur begin to work the room. He was leaning in with practiced charm, gesturing broadly as he cornered Oliver Vance near the bar. I could see the way Arthur puffed up his chest, likely talking about sterling real estate and the perfect air he had in Julian. Then I saw his face shift. His expression darkened as he began to speak to a woman named Rachel, the chief operations officer of Vance Global. Even from upstairs, I could read his body language. He was doing it again. He was telling her the story of his troubled daughter, the thief who had disgraced the family. He was spinning the narrative he had used to blacklist me for 2 years, using my supposed failures to make himself look like a long-suffering, noble father. Eleanor stood beside him, nodding along as the perfect, supportive wife. Julian was at the bar, oblivious and flirting, while our father spent his evening destroying my reputation one last time. The old shame tried to rise in my chest, that familiar burn of being defined by a lie. But I touched the letter from Grandma Rosemary tucked into my clutch, and the feeling vanished. I wasn't that girl anymore. Miss Sterling, the assistant whispered, appearing at my side. Mr. Vance is beginning his remarks. It is time. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the side door. Oliver Vance took the microphone as the crowd gathered around the stage. He spoke about integrity, perseverance, and the courage to stand alone when necessary. He said that Vance Global was built on those values, and today they were welcoming someone who represented all of them. Before we continue, he said, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom, I would like to introduce a very special person. Please welcome our newest senior financial analyst and a founding shareholder of Vance Global, Miss Lena Sterling. I stepped out into the light. 200 faces turned toward me as my heels clicked steadily against the marble floor. The navy dress caught the shimmer of the chandeliers, and I kept my head high. I didn't look at Arthur yet, but I felt the exact moment he saw me. There was a sharp intake of breath to my left, followed by the jagged sound of a champagne flute shattering on the floor. That was Julian. I reached the stage, and Oliver shook my hand, leaning close to murmur that I was doing great. Then, I turned to face the audience. Arthur stood frozen near the bar, his face white and his mouth open in a silent gasp. Eleanor had grabbed his arm so hard her knuckles were bloodless. I smiled at them, not with cruelty, but with the calm of someone who had finally learned their voice. But Arthur couldn't help himself. The rage that had controlled our household for decades boiled over. Lena, he roared, pushing past a waiter and nearly knocking over a tray of drinks. What the hell do you think you are doing here? The room went dead silent. Security, he barked, looking around wildly. Someone get security. This woman is a criminal. She shouldn't be here. Oliver Vance stepped forward, his voice like cold iron. Mr. Sterling, I would suggest you lower your voice. Arthur sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at me. You don't understand. She is a thief. I told you this morning she stole $1,500 from her own family. She isn't qualified to be in this building, let alone on that stage. Oliver's eyebrow rose. I am well aware of Miss Sterling's qualifications, he said. I am also aware that the theft you reference was $1,500 in textbooks that she paid back in full, with receipts. And I am very much aware that you have been trying to force her into an arranged marriage to secure a construction merger. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Arthur's face went from white to a deep, dangerous purple. That is a lie. This is fraud. My mother-in-law was senile. Those documents can't be real. Elena Sterling is not just an employee, Oliver continued, letting the silence build for maximum effect. She owns 10% of this company. She has been a founding shareholder since she was 6 years old because her grandmother, Rosemary Hayes, wanted to protect her from people exactly like you. The room erupted into whispers. Arthur was sweating now, his carefully constructed image as a pillar of the community crumbling in seconds. "I'll sue," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "I raised you. I fed you. And this is how you repay me? I made you clean toilets. I made sure no one would hire you, and I would do it again, because you need to learn respect." Julian stepped forward, looking pale and sick as he watched our father self-destruct in front of every business contact they ever had. "Dad, stop. We should go," he whispered, but Arthur shoved him back. "She is nothing." Arthur screamed, spittle at the corners of his mouth. "Her shares don't change what she is. A thief and a disgrace." I stepped to the microphone. "I didn't come here for revenge," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I came here because I spent 2 years being called a failure while I was being sabotaged by the people who were supposed to protect me. I worked the only job I could get, and I was told I had to surrender my freedom to survive." I looked directly at my father. "I don't hate you, Dad, but I am done seeking your approval. I am done accepting your definition of my worth. This is my boundary. I will not let you control my life anymore." Arthur and my family left the gala in total silence, with no one stopping them or offering a kind word. As the door closed behind them, I felt the weight of 18 years finally lift off my shoulders. I was no longer a bargaining chip or a thief. I was Lena Sterling, and for the first time in my life, I was free. The silence that followed my father's exit from the Grand Meridian Ballroom was unlike anything I had ever heard. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, breathless kind that follows a massive explosion. 200 of the most influential people in the city stood frozen, their eyes tracking the swinging doors where Arthur Sterling had just vanished. My father hadn't just lost his temper. He had publicly admitted to a 2-year campaign of sabotage against his own blood. In his desperation to maintain control, he had stripped away his own mask of professional integrity and shown the world the monster underneath. As the jazz quartet began to play again, a strange thing happened. The very same people who had avoided my gaze for 18 months suddenly began to move toward me. The first was a woman in her 50s, the HR director from a firm that had rejected me 6 months ago. She took my hand, her eyes filled with a deep, visible shame. She told me she owed me a significant apology and pressed a business card into my hand, telling me that if I ever wanted to discuss a real opportunity without my father's interference, her door was open. Then came another executive, and another. A wave of business cards and quiet apologies flooded toward me as the business community realized they had been pawns in Arthur's twisted game. Before I tell you about the incredible new life I built and the final conversation I had with my mother, if you have stayed with me until this final chapter, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your engagement allows us to share these stories of truth and triumph. I want to hear from you one last time in the comments. What does the word freedom mean to you? Is it a number in a bank account, or is it the ability to say no to people who don't respect you? I'm reading every single response. Now, let's look at what happened when the dust finally settled. 1 month later, my life looked completely different. I was no longer pushing a cleaning cart through the hallways of a budget resort. Instead, I had a corner office on the 14th floor of Vance Global. It wasn't the biggest office. I was still junior in terms of actual experience, but it had a nameplate on the door that read Elena Sterling, Senior Financial Analyst. Most importantly, it had a floor-to-ceiling window with a view of the city skyline that reminded me every single morning that I was no longer trapped. Oliver Vance had been a man of his word. He sat me down with the legal team to finalize the transfer of the founding shares Grandma Rosemary had left me. At their current valuation, those shares were worth approximately $2.4 million. I remember staring at that number on the screen, unable to even comprehend it. For years, I had been made to feel worthless over a $1,200 debt that wasn't even real. Now, I had enough to ensure I would never be under anyone's thumb again. I moved into a small but beautiful one-bedroom apartment in a building with a doorman and a gym. I bought fresh lilies for the kitchen table every Sunday simply because I could afford them and because they reminded me of the life I had claimed for myself. My colleagues at Vance Global respected my work, and for the first time, my contributions were valued based on the accuracy of my reports rather than my obedience to a patriarch. Meanwhile, the fallout for my father was catastrophic. The news of his outburst at the gala spread through the business community like wildfire. Within 3 weeks, 3 of Sterling Real Estate's largest construction contracts were canceled. Major partners didn't want to be associated with a man who had publicly admitted to sabotaging his daughter and trying to trade her like a piece of property in a business merger. His company was still standing, but it was diminished, a shadow of the empire he had once boasted about. My mother, Eleanor, called me once. Her voice was small and fragile, stripped of the practiced perfection she usually wore. She asked if I could ever forgive them and if we could ever be a family again. I sat on my new balcony, looking out at the city, and felt a profound sense of sadness for her. I told her that I did forgive her, and I meant it. The anger had faded into something quieter, but I also told her the truth. I wasn't coming back. I explained that I could never live under those conditions again, and that the price of her silence had been my childhood. She cried, and I listened. But when we hung up, I didn't feel guilty. I felt resolved. Julian sent a generic apology via text, likely drafted by a PR consultant to save his own reputation. I responded with a simple thank you and nothing else. As for Arthur, he never reached out. I didn't expect him to. To a man like him, my success wasn't a source of pride. It was a personal insult to his authority. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I drove to the cemetery to visit Grandma Rosemary. I brought her favorite yellow roses and sat by her headstone for a long time. I realized then that she hadn't just given me money or stocks. She had given me the greatest gift of all, options. She knew the kind of man my father was, and she spent years quietly constructing a door he couldn't lock. Love, I realized, isn't about words or promises. It's about actions that build a foundation for someone else to stand on. As I read her letter one last time, the paper now soft and worn from my touch, the final sentence stood out. Live free, Elena. And for the first time in 26 years, I finally was. I had built a life that belonged to me. Not as a thief, not as an asset, but as a woman who knew her own worth. If you are stuck in a controlling situation or feel like you are being made worthless by the people who should protect you, please remember my story. You can get out. You can build your own door. It won't be easy, and it might take time, but the view from the other side is worth every single step. Thank you for staying until the end. Take care of yourselves. You deserve to be free. Standing on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the city skyline, I finally understood the true meaning of the silence I had chased for so long. For 2 years, my life had been a roar of accusations, whispers, and the deafening weight of my father's control. But now, as a senior financial analyst at Mercer Holdings, the only sound I heard was the quiet confidence of a woman who finally owned her own story. I looked down at my hands, no longer hidden in yellow rubber gloves or trembling from the fear of another rejection letter, and realized that the $2.4 million in shares Grandma Margaret had left me wasn't just wealth. It was the physical proof that I was never the failure my father claimed I was. I spent so long believing that my value was something my father, Gerald Thornton, had to grant me. I thought that if I just worked hard enough or stayed quiet enough, he would eventually see me as a person rather than a bargaining chip to be traded for a construction contract. But the truth is, some people don't want to see your value. They only want to see your obedience. My father didn't blacklist me because he thought I was a thief. He did it because he knew that as long as I was desperate, I was under his thumb. Before I share the final, most important lesson I learned about setting boundaries with toxic family, I want to invite you to join our community. If Ingrid's journey from scrubbing floors to standing in her truth has moved you, Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us tell more stories about resilience and the power of finding your own way. I would also love to read your final thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose your own peace over a family member's approval? How did that choice change your life? Drop a comment below. I am reading every single one. Now, let us talk about the day I had to say the hardest no of my life. A month after the gala, the fallout for Thornton Construction was undeniable. My father's public meltdown had stripped away his reputation as a pillar of the community, revealing a man who viewed his own daughter as property. When my mother, Diane, finally called me, her voice was a ghost of the woman I remembered. She asked for forgiveness, wondering if we could ever be a family again, if we could just go back to the way things were. That was the moment I had to apply the most difficult lesson Grandma Margaret taught me. Forgiveness and access are two very different things. I told my mother that I did forgive her. I forgave her for the silence she kept while my father dismantled my future, and I even forgave her for the time she looked away while he screamed at me over $1,200 that I had already paid back. But I also told her that I was not coming back. I couldn't live under those conditions again, where love was treated like a leash and my worth was a variable in a business ledger. Setting that boundary wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of survival. I spent years feeling guilty for wanting independence, thinking that my desire for a life of my own was a betrayal of my family. But Grandma's letter reminded me that the people who truly love you don't protect you by controlling you. They protect you by giving you options. They build foundations for you to stand on, not walls to keep you in. My brother Marcus sent a generic apology, likely worried about how his association with our father would affect his own social standing. I thanked him and left it at that. I realized that I didn't need to rebuild every bridge I had walked across. Some bridges were meant to be burned to keep the wolves at bay. As for Gerald, he never reached out. To a man whose entire identity is built on dominance, my success was a personal defeat he couldn't acknowledge. On my last visit to Grandma Margaret's grave, I sat among the yellow roses and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had seen the trap my father was building 15 years before I ever stepped into it. She couldn't stop him directly. My mother wouldn't leave him. So she did the next best thing. She secretly constructed a door he could never lock. Her foresight, her legal planning, and her belief in me were the true inheritance. The lesson I want you to take away from my story is this. Keep going, even when every door seems closed and every voice is telling you that you are worthless. Somewhere, someone might be preparing a path for you that you can't see yet. Whether it is a stranger's kindness, a grandmother's foresight, or your own stubborn refusal to give up, your value is not determined by the people who fail to see it. I keep Grandma's letter in my wallet, the paper now soft and worn from the many times I have read it to remind myself of who I am. Live free, Ingrid, she had written. And that is exactly what I am doing. I am building a life that belongs to me, one day at a time, with a career I earned and a peace that no one can take away. If you are stuck in a situation where you feel small or controlled, please know that you are not alone. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to be free. You might have to build your own door, piece by piece, but I promise you, the life waiting on the other side is worth every struggle. Thank you so much for staying until the end of this journey. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories of strength and truth. And if you are ready for another story about standing up for yourself, check out the next video on the screen. I think you will find it just as inspiring as this one. Take care of yourself. You deserve to be free.